Hi, my name is Henry Shadikaya, and today I come to you as a hypnotherapist that has worked with more than 10,000 clients. My special field of interest at this time is brainwashing and mind control by cults. In the last few weeks, I have posted an interview with KOVIAK that you see here. Jan was completely brainwashed by a cult called the Science of Identity, and the leader of the cult, Butler, that you see here. He gave himself a fancy name, Jagat Guru Siddhar Swarup Ananda Paramahamsa, which basically means I am the greatest spiritual master in the universe. Jan KOVIAK was completely abandoned when he was 12 years old in the Butler cult school in the Philippines, where he was terribly abused physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually. He is now deprogrammed and has made a successful life for himself. Today I would like to share another testimonial from an ex-cult member of the Science of Identity. Her name is Lalita. Contrary to Jan KOVIAK, she remained with her family till she was around 19 years old. Her parents were completely brainwashed and tried to brainwash her since she was a very small child. It is a very interesting story that mirrors other stories of cults like ex-member of Scientology, Jehovah's Witness, Mormons. Eventually, when she was 19 years old, she completely moved out of the cult, and because she refused to worship Butler as her Lord and Master, she was completely ostracized, rejected from our own mother and father to this day. It is a tremendous story if you want to learn about how brainwashing works. If you want to learn how damaging this programming of cult can be to your subconscious mind. Butler's philosophy is basically the same as the Hare Krishna movement, with the same views on sexuality, which basically mean you don't have sex until you are married, and then you're supposed to have sex only to reproduce, and naturally homosexuality is a complete no-no. In the interview that you will hear, at one point, she's not sure if devotees of Butler did eat the nail clippings of Butler. Well, I'm 100% sure that they did. Some people on culteducation.com have given testimonial that they actually ate the nail clipping of Butler. So more I hear about Butler, more I think he's such a megalomaniac, narcissistic, sociopath. What kind of a heart can a person like this have to treat people the way he did, causing so much suffering, mental and emotional breakdown, just because the kids being raised in his cult at one point did not want to worship him as the representative of God on earth. This guy is, in good American language, an asshole. And for Tulsi Gabbard to hear such testimonial and not speak out against her guru is shameful. Now she's making $175,000 a year, plus all kinds of bonuses for her husband, etc., etc. To let all the people that are giving testimonial that the guru's a megalomaniac and still say to the New Yorker magazine, "Oh, I've never heard my guru say anything wrong." She's hiding that she went to the Philippines and was brainwashed like the others to become a complete homophobe. And we know by pictures like this one, where not long ago she was still making offering, worshiping the picture of Chris Butler. It's scandalous. At this point, I really want to destroy the brand of the science of identity. I really want to destroy the brand Jagat Guru Siddhar Swarup Ananda Paramahamsa. Him saying that he's the greatest guru in the universe is complete bullshit. We have written letters to various government agencies that they must investigate this guy. They must investigate this cult. Jan KOVIAK is married, has 2 kids, a successful business. Lalita is now a sound engineer. She's in a relationship. She has children. She is happy. Deprogramming is possible, but you have to make a first step. You have to say, enough is enough. Don't wait to have a near-death experience like Lalita described at the end of this video to make a choice to regain power over your life. Under this video, I will put a link to the complete interview. In this video, I will put about 30 minutes of it. Enough for you to have an idea how sinister brainwashing by the cult of science of identity can be. Thank you very much.
We were kind of one of those interesting groups that kind of interacted with society for a bit, but not so much. Like, we were living in normal suburbs, but we didn't really interact with the people around us. My earliest memories were going to it must have been a kindergarten that they ran themselves. I just remember being there, going to classes when I was very little on different subjects, and just doing prayers as a group and getting into a lot of trouble. And then we did have a brief period where we were allowed to go to school, public school, which I think for me was between year 2 here and year 5. So I think I was 6 up until age 11. And then we were sort of living on a farm in the northern part, or sort of the mid-coast of Eastern Australia. And we were sort of in society, but not in society. So we were there, but we were separate. And I hope that sort of makes sense.
It does, yeah. So what did you think as a kid? Did you like it? Were you happy?
Well, I guess initially, yeah, because that was all I knew. It was, it was fun hanging out with my friends, and you have this whole, a secret society mentality almost, in a way. I guess it is really, where you get to hang out with your friends and you've got this great big secret that you get to keep and you're special, and it was kind of that camaraderie of you have this interaction that no one else outside of it knows or understands, and you're sort of brought up with this idea. So yeah, initially it was good until it sort of hit my teens and I started to realize that I was quite depressed, and all the things that they were telling me to do to not feel depressed was making me feel more depressed. And it got to a point where I just felt like I was this happiness that I was supposed to have, that they were telling me that I would get from doing all the things that I was doing, wasn't happening, and I didn't understand why, and it was a very confusing time. So, and a lot of the things that we were being asked to do, the way people were being treated, it just all started to fall apart for me because it just felt unfair a lot of the time, the way people were treated.
Tell me more about how people were treated, both adults and children.
Well, there was difficult to sort of describe because a lot of it is trying to work out how much of it is just normal people interactions and how much of it is very specific to the group that I grew up in. But there was a lot of running around being afraid of doing the wrong thing, like saying the wrong thing. Quite often we'd get communications from the US where the leader would go back to saying that he'd gotten sick because of someone had fed him the wrong food, or something had happened and it had made him sick, so everyone was in trouble. And we, even as children, were responsible for paying penance for the fact that he wasn't well or something bad had happened. Or, you know, I remember writing in my diary, he got sick one day and apparently caught a cold so bad he dislocated his jaw from vomiting or something. And we were required to do like 24-hour prayers, which meant we would stay up and take shifts to pray for the cult leader. So that there was a lot of, I just remember there being a lot of fear and just people walking around in a lot of secrecy. And yeah, you couldn't talk openly, you couldn't interact without worrying that you were saying the wrong thing to someone. So it was always this constant state of watching yourself, watching what you say. And it just was exhausting.
You mentioned earlier that you got in trouble a lot. What sort of things did you get in trouble for?
I remember being like very young, I think maybe about 4 or 5, and one of the religious things that we had to do was this prayer where you stand there with a stick of incense and you have pictures of the various succession of leaders of the group, and you had to circle each body part with the incense 3 times, which became very boring as a 5-year-old. And I remember doing that and looking at the incense, and my mum used to smoke when I was very little. So I looked at the incense and I thought, oh, this looks a bit like a cigarette. I wonder what'll happen if I smoke it. And then the teacher saw me do it, grabbed me, smacked me really hard and threw me out the house that we were in. And then all of the kids just refused to speak to me for weeks. Really horrific thing of pretending that something that looked like a cigarette was a cigarette. So yeah, that sort of, I'd get into trouble because I was a curious person and I just wanted to try stuff as you do as a kid, and that got me into a lot of trouble.
So it sounds like the shaming came from the other kids. It wasn't just adults or the leaders. It would be kind of everyone around you would react to some sort of misdoing.
Yeah, well, it's that self-enforcement that happens in these groups. Like, you're taught to judge each other right from the word go. You're taught to keep each other in line. And so that's what they were just doing, what they were taught. So that's what we did. We all did it, unfortunately. It never sat well with me personally because I just didn't understand why I had to judge someone I considered a friend so harshly, but that's just the way that it was growing up.
How many people were involved in this? Like, about how many people did you have around you in your community at one time?
We had, I would say, a couple of hundred at various times, but we were spread out all along the coast of Australia, or the east coast of Australia. So there'd be a big group in, say, Sydney. There'd be another big group in Queensland where they originally set up the operations. And we'd all, like once or twice a year, we'd go to Queensland and have a big religious camp out, I guess. We would all meet up, do prayers and have feasts and all those sort of religious things that probably happen in most religions to some degree. But yeah, we'd sort of have our own little groups and then we'd all have a big gathering every now and then.
And you had your own schools. I think you mentioned, I remember when we talked before, you said something about a boarding school in the Philippines.
Yeah, education was kind of a complicated history for me. So initially they started off having schools. I don't know why they were within Australia. I don't know what happened there. Probably something to do with the legal requirements within Australia for kids to be in education. I don't think there was any leeway to running a homeschool. And then they let us go to public school for a while, and then the leader of the group decided he didn't like us being influenced by the teachers there, so we were all then pulled out of school again, and then they started their own schools in the Philippines, a boys' school and a girls' school that the kids were then sent off to, I think from as young as 12, to this boarding school in the Philippines.
And boys and girls were separated. I remember you said something about that. Now, was that something in the boarding school, or was that throughout the group?
That was throughout the group. So from the age of about 10, I think, we weren't allowed to interact with kids of the opposite sex, our own age. So we were kept separate. We weren't allowed to talk to each other at all. If we ever wanted to interact with each other, we had to get permission from our parents. So it made dating or seeing other people incredibly awkward and difficult.
I bet. Yeah, it must be impossible to pursue any sort of relationship.
I had no relationships with anyone until I left. So it was really not the most pleasant thing. So essentially, like, the way that it was set up was that we weren't allowed to interact. We had separate accommodations. Even with the religious ceremonies, we had to stay separate, like stand in separate parts of the room. We weren't allowed to socialize with each other. So yeah, we had to get permission to even like show interest in each other. There was a lot of arranged marriages as a result, and a lot of marriage breakdowns because you didn't have that sort of normal interaction where you got to know someone, got to see if you actually liked them, and then take it from there. It was just like, hey, you had to show interest in this person, work up the courage to tell your parents, and then maybe they might agree to letting you go and have a supervised visit with them. So, yeah, it was a bit awkward.
That sounds really protective, but at the same time, it also sounded like there were ways children were treated inappropriately, like in a sexual way. I saw something about the leader discussing sex acts with people from a very young age. Is that something that happened?
Yeah, so for us, because he was based in the US, he would send us, and I think it's changed now, the method, but not what happens. He would send us lectures of him talking on tape, and then we would have those tapes played to us. So we'd have get up very early in the morning, we'd do morning prayers, we'd do what we called chanting, which is probably similar to the Hare Krishnas, where we'd sing prayers for an hour or so, and then we'd sit down and they'd play this tape. And quite often these tapes were of the leader talking about his philosophy. He'd then go on about how much he hated gay people, how much he hated these people and that people, and then quite often he'd go into quite graphic descriptions of what gay people were doing, what he thought was horrible, like how uncontrollable people were around sex or having sex, and just go into a lot of detail. I remember being quite young and I just feeling very confused about a lot of things. I know that of my own research, I've looked into the fact that kids will quite often explore sexuality from a young age, but for us it was just filled with so much shame. I remember acting out a few things with my cousin and then just feeling like, oh my God, we need to go and die because we've discovered that we have emotions and it's this really terrible, horrible thing to have. Like, how dare we even think about sex as human beings?
Wow. And what was going on in your mind during all of this? This must have caused stress for you and your friends and your family.
Yeah, it's impacted, it still impacts me, the whole just interacting with other people, especially people who are of the opposite sex. I find it quite hard. Even though it's been 20 years and I've had lots of interactions with people, I still don't really, I can't quite have a normal interaction with people because it's almost like my baseline understanding of relationships has been completely skewed. So I don't know if I can't tell if someone's talking to me because they genuinely just want to get to know me, and it just becomes very confusing even now. I know for a long time, especially when I first got out, I couldn't actually be physically intimate with someone without drinking a lot of alcohol first, because it was just such a traumatic thing to do, because I was going against everything I've been raised to believe in. And there was just a lot of self-punishment, I guess, over just wanting to just be intimate with someone.
You also said that the children worked a lot. I mean, it sounds like everyone did, the adults and the children.
Yeah, that's a big one. It was kind of hard to explain, but if I could sort of summarize it, our whole existence was there to serve the leader of this group. He was our spiritual master, and so any moment of our lives that wasn't in service of him was wasted. So anything that we did that was outside of it was a waste of our time. It was taking us away from going back to heaven or Godhead, which is what we called it. And if we weren't investing every second of every day, every thought into serving him, then we were doing him and ourselves a disservice. So it was kind of expected from an early age that we would go and work for him, whether that was doing things like transcribing his lecture tapes, working in his office. He had a kitchen where he had food made for him. If you were lucky enough to be invited over to work for him, then you got to go and work there. But the conditions were just really, really long. And I actually have a letter, which I mentioned to you, which kind of helps outline just the kind of hours that us kids were subjected to.
Yes, let's hear it.
So this is from a friend of mine. She was working, okay, so just to give some background, she worked quite closely with the cult leaders' stepchildren. And she would do everything for them. They obviously got special privilege being the stepchildren of the cult leader. So they would have all their food made for them, all of their laundry done for them. They'd have their own personal masseuses, physical trainers, because they were training to do movies. So this letter from my friend, she was one of the people that was doing most of that work. So she says here, just got back from late night cleanup. It's 3 a.m. and I have to finish this letter because I will try to get them posted tomorrow. In the kitchen, I'm just going to skip over names because I don't really want to call out people by name. She gives a couple of names, and myself all work under another person who is an inhumane slave driver or worse. My hours are 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. and then 10:45 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. and in between those times I sleep and I don't have much of a social life. She was 18 when she wrote that. And I know other kids that had been working for him doing those sorts of hours from the age of 14, 15. And they weren't paid. They were just doing it because that's what was expected of them. I know other people who at that sort of really impressionable age doing those sorts of hours and then making a mistake and then being fired, his version of firing, kicking them off whatever duties they were and made to just wander around a neighborhood in the middle of the night trying to find somewhere to sleep. Like, that's the kind of punishments that they had.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
What did people get out of following this guy? I mean, he sounds awful. Your parents had to have gotten something out of this.
I don't know. I mean, obviously I find it very difficult to find anything pleasant about the guy, but the only thing that I have been able to gather from them is it just gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them, they're almost in a way more afraid of what will happen if they don't stay than because he's filled them up with these ideas that the world is a terrible place and they're all going to hell if they don't follow him. And if they just stick with him, he's going to lead them to enlightenment. So I think that they're more fearful of what will happen if they don't stay than they are of what if they do stay.
Yeah, because that's what seems to happen. I mean, nobody, as far as I know, says, hey, I'm going to join this really restrictive cult and have this guy order me around, and it's going to be great. I mean, people join for some reason that benefits them in some way, and then it just, I guess, turns bad. It gets more and more demanding. So I assume that's what happened with your group, but that sounds really intense with all the work and with the demands of this guy. I think you mentioned that he was also a germaphobe, so that so that probably caused some issues, and he probably had problems with a lot of things that people did.
Yeah, he actually had quite a few of the kids serving on what they call air patrol, which was, if he was intending to go somewhere to, say, give a lecture or something, they would have to go to this location and sniff for toxins because they had to make sure that it was clean for him to go to. And then whenever he was in a location, they were stationed outside of this location sniffing for toxins, and if they smelled something, they'd run and tell them so that they could evacuate him. I laugh about it now because it's just so, but it was this, I remember it being this very intense, very important role that we had to protect him from all the germs. And that was actually kind of one of the key things that made me leave, was I was like, I would go to these lectures and he'd be saying, oh, well, I'm the emissary of God and I'm the closest person to God, and we have such a great relationship that I have this special understanding with him that I can leave this plane of existence whenever I choose. And he was terrified of germs. And I'm like, well, that doesn't add up, because you're terrified the bugs are going to do what if you can choose your death? So what does it matter if you smell something in the air?
And another letter that you mentioned to me said something about drinking out of footprints of his.
Yeah.
Please tell me more about that.
Okay, so aside from the tapes, one of the big things was, and this I believe also is one of the rituals that comes down from the Hare Krishnas, is when the leader eats food or touches stuff, it's purified just by his presence. And what this was he would eat food and then they would take the leftovers off his plate and send it out to his followers around the world, and they called that Mahaprasad. So we would get sent bits of food that we would then eat, and that would purify us. But a friend of mine took it just a little step further. She sent me a letter one day. I'm just going to nickname the cult leader SP. That's just sort of one of the nicknames we called him. It's just easier, and when I see his name it's easier to read it out. So she wrote to me and she said, on Sunday we had a choice chant. Okay, so chanting was just a religious gathering with SP. I got so much maha. I was standing with another person, I think it was her brother, and we were standing right next to him. He got heaps as well. So that would be the food scraps. I will send you some of my maha. I also followed SP and went after him, getting the sand in his footprints. I have a maha bottle full of it. I ate about 2 teaspoons of it. It tastes cool. So she ate sand out of his footprints because it was considered purified. And I did hear rumors, I don't know if it's true, allegedly people were also eating his toenail clippings.
Oh man.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true. I never saw that part. Definitely the food scraps were something that I experienced. This, and my friend, I actually saw the bottle of sand. She showed it to me. So it was, yeah, that was definitely real. But for the other one was kind of a rumor that I heard about.
So she ate sand.
She ate sand,
and it tasted, what it is, she said something positive about how it tasted. Cool, huh?
Yeah,
cool. Huh. At what point did you realize this wasn't something you wanted to participate in anymore?
It was really a long process for me. So one of the big things in the group was that they wanted to do a movie. SP was writing it, and we were all going to be in it. It was this big thing sort of in the early 90s. And so he ended up coming back to Australia to film this movie that he was writing. And we were all very excited about it because he was in the country, so we got to actually spend time with him and we got to be in a movie, and who doesn't want to be in a movie when you're a teenager? So I ended up going, because we lived in about 1,000 kilometres away roughly from where he was going to be based. My aunt and uncle had gone up ahead and moved to where he was living, and I went to stay with them for a while so that I could be part of the inner circle and work my way in. And while I was there, I just started to, I guess, really see things for what they were. I was only maybe between 15 and 17, I think, at the time. But I'd already had questions about, because there was a lot of secrecy within the group. We weren't allowed to tell anyone what we believed, and we had to hide it. We weren't allowed to show people in public what we believed. So the Hare Krishnas would go out and get donations or do live sort of chanting. We weren't allowed to do any of that. We weren't allowed to let anyone know what we believed. And so I already had questions about, well, why can't we tell people? And then so I went up to be, we called it being on site with this person. So I went up to be on site with SP, and while I was there, it was just a lot of my friends, like 14-year-olds, being fired because they were working in his office and they stood around for too long. They were in this constant state of distress because they'd been fired and thinking, oh my God, am I going to be expelled from the group? Is he ever going to forgive me? And like the 14-year-olds. And then they had to write him these groveling letters of apology to say, please let me back in, please let me back to work for you. And I just remember getting really angry at it. Like, it just didn't seem fair. And then one day I actually had the opportunity to talk to him face to face. My cousin and I were walking around a park with my uncle, and he was in the park. All of a sudden it was like, oh great. And then he invited us to walk around with him and talk to him, and it was a very big privilege. We were beyond excited. And so we started walking around this park with him, and he was asking us, oh, so what do you want to do? What are your aspirations in life? And my dad was a musician. I'm a passionate musician myself. And I was telling him, oh, I really want to learn how to play piano. I really want to write music. I'm very excited about it. And he said, oh, hold up your hands. So I held up my hands. And it's probably going to sound petty, but it really just, I don't know. I held up my hands, and he looked at them and he goes, oh, you'll never be able to play pianos. Your hands are too stumpy. That's
who
okay.
Says that? Like, who says that?
I know. And that was my reaction to it. It was like, what? Like, you're supposed to be this great spiritual leader who's enlightened, and you're being so petty. He just was like, oh, but you know, I have the same problem. My hands are stumpy too. Held his up, and it's like, but it's okay. You know, we'll have the same problem together, kind of thing. And it's like, no, I really want to play piano. Don't tell me I can't do that.
Well, did you go on? So, did you go on to play piano?
No, well, sort of. Those things, they leave a mark, and it left a mark. But I walked away from that experience, and I just thought, I don't know that I'm that impressed with him. And and then I went to a lecture not long after that, and he was talking about why he started his first cult, I think, or got involved in religion. And he was talking about how he was dating a girl, and she broke up with him to date a guy who was richer, and he was so angry that she dared date somebody else that he ran off basically and joined the circus, or joined a religion. And that was his whole reasoning. And I'd grown up with being told, because I was female, and in this group females were considered subhuman, like literally told, you are a lower form of birth, you will never achieve the same spirituality as a man, so therefore your place is in the kitchen, you must serve your husband after you serve your spiritual master.
That makes me angry.
Yeah, me too. So he was telling me all of this, and then telling me why, and I'm like, so you got dumped by a girl, and you joined a religion, and you're punishing me because of one person, because you had one bad relationship. And I remember being so angry at the time. And I just wanted to stand up and walk out, but I couldn't, because I knew to do that meant being rejected by the entire group, kicked out. I wouldn't have a home. I was 16. Like, what am I going to do? I don't know anyone in the outside world at that point. So that kind of was at the start of the whole unraveling for me. It ended up being a catalyst moment when I'd already sort of started to pull myself away. I'd stopped chanting, I'd stopped doing all the prayers, and I was fighting a lot with my parents over it. I ended up in a really severe car accident and almost died. And I just remember the moment before, because the car that I was in hit a tree roof first, and I was in the car, and I remember seeing the tree in the headlights and just thinking, I'm not ready to be done with this life yet. And I came out of that, and I just realized after that, like within a month, I needed to get away. And that was the catalyst for me. It was like, I'm not living a life that I want to live anymore, so I need to get away. And so it was quite a long process after that of making contacts in the outside world, which is really difficult to do when you've sort of been cloistered in a group for so long. I was lucky that the internet was just starting to be a thing. Chat was just starting to be a thing, so I could chat to people online without my parents being able to say too much because they didn't know who I was talking to, and I was able to make some contacts outside of the group. And eventually just made a small group of friends. There was a guy that I'd been chatting to who was looking for a flatmate. I moved out of home with him. I'd known him for about a month.
And how old were you?
19.